All right, and we are live. Hey guys, Comic Boom here, and this is my first ever episode of a series of live streams that I'm gonna call Comic Boomerang. And my first guest is someone who I've known for about over a year now, and that's Spike Valentine. And this is a guy who's always sort of enlightened me on comic books, and he's got a very unique perspective. Often he sort of enlightens me about script editing, and he's very insightful when it comes to storytelling and structure and what have you. And he's got a gift for describing comic books. Often when I don't,
that's too much, man. You're
no,
making me blush
mean,
over
serious.
here.
Well, let me introduce you first, and then you can disagree with my introduction. Because one of the things I like about our guest Spike Valentine is that if I ever have a problem, if him and I, let's say we don't like a comic for whatever reason, and I can't articulate why, he always has a way of explaining why I might not, why it didn't work in a way that I would not have seen. I just have a gut feeling, but I can't articulate it. Spike, and because he's a professional and he does this, I guess, for a living, that's why he's so good at what he does. And so that's why I wanted Spike on. And I want to say that I call this comic Boomerang because I jokingly said to Spike, and I mean it, this is the channel where whatever I say will come back to haunt me or whoever else is on here. And because let's face it, we're in the midst of a culture war right now. And my Comic Boom channel is such where I generally focus on comic book reviews, but I don't mind if occasionally we do talk a little bit of politics. We do talk a little bit of comic skate, SJWs, whatever the phrase is, because let's face it, it's part of our culture, and it's not something, if we just let it fester and we don't talk about these things, I don't think it serves anyone any good. And anyways, Spike, how are things going?
All better now. I've been having work stress related issues, but I'm on treatment. I'm on a diet. I'm down 3 kilos, stuff like that.
Oh, really?
It was we had our Independence holiday weekend here. It's more than the Independence. It's the call to arms to independence. I all I did was writing. I haven't really celebrated, and because we have such great food and I can't eat it, so I stayed home and taking care of the dog because she gets scared because of all the firecrackers and stuff.
Well, you know what? You say you have great food, but I noticed that your icon there for the hangout here is you eating a giant sandwich. So
Yeah, it's a sub, yeah.
yeah, you're tempting yourself. You should get rid of that temptation.
I don't know, man. I like back a couple of months ago, the healthiest thing I was eating were Subway subs. No, it's funny because a lot of people have told me how this picture really captures my my essence, because it also has a dialogue which says, "Oh, I hate that chippy the something. I hate that cartoony shit." It's from a Hack Slash comic book. Good friends with Healy, creator of Hack Slash, and he does a bunch of comics over at DC now.
That's good. I was going to say that on your icon, you're wearing a Green Lantern shirt, so I would have thought that meant that you have a lot of willpower, but I guess not.
Surprisingly, every time I get like doctor's instructions, I'm not like, I haven't really struggled with the diet. Like the only time I struggled was I went to the Spider-Man video game release party, and it was it started at midnight, so at like 3 a.m. I went to have tacos because I was starving. That's the only circumstance. But I actually told my my nutrologist, and she said, it's okay if you do it like once in a while, but you have to maintain it and make it like a routine and stuff.
Oh, that's good. Let me ask you this. You said you've had, can you talk about anything that you're currently working on, or is it under wraps, or can you?
I'm doing something with Domino's Colorist. I'm actually writing his character, his comic book character. I'm not even the only one writing it. It seems like he has like this big project, and for certain stories, he's getting like certain folk to write the stories. There's I think there's already a public one out there. It's actually free. I just need to talk to him to because he knows what it is. I don't know. So I could link. I think I could link that later. And I'm trying to do my own comics, and but I've been struggling, and this is a struggle I've had for I guess even back when. I mean, since 2006, I've been struggling to find like an artist I can work with, like do our own stuff, and it's I I've literally, even after I've paid people, they have let me down, dude.
Yeah. Yeah, that must be frustrating. That was is that something that's endemic in the industry, you find, or is that just
I think at least in Mexico's circle it is, because most of the guys who are good, who deliver and stuff, they got the exclusive contracts. So you've heard of, for example, Gerardo Sandoval. He just did the what's the name, the Spider Punk comic book that was released, I think, last month, and the guy's very good. With Paco Medina, all these guys are like my friends. I had dinner with their families, like I know their kids and stuff. But these guys are very talented and they are very responsible. So I get why they get the exclusives and they get paid way more than the average freelancer at the big two. So yeah, I've been trying, and it's funny because in a certain way, Marvel and myself are trying to do the same thing, to find the undiscovered next Jim Lee. I think, right. But it's fucking impossible to have an undiscovered Jim Lee in such an age when you can make money like on Patreon and stuff by drawing stuff.
Well, it's funny, like when you say Marvel trying to find the undiscovered Jim Lee, and and by the way, I'll let leak that. Well, you showed me. I think you showed me a Wonder Woman sketch, didn't you, of the artist that you're?
Yeah. I sent you some of his.
Yeah, and I can say that man, that was gorgeous. That was truly gorgeous. So I'm really looking forward. I really hope that the artist can find the time to finish your project together, because I'd definitely be looking forward to it, and definitely put the link there. But with the talking about Marvel in general, though, I actually, and we're going to get into this. I'll start off by saying this, that before this hangout began, I know, because I've listened to your comments on other live stream, Spike, and I got the impression that you felt that there were certain habits and certain things that Marvel hadn't maybe changed up from 2017 or from the past, and I thought, I've generally had a more optimistic attitude in terms of going into 2018. I think Marvel's gotten a lot better. Although I will say, I think their art overall, I think in Marvel, they could probably use some better artists. So it's interesting that you should say that. But so if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you specifically, how would you at this point, because we're in September 2018, we know what 2017 was. I mean, you could write a book yourself on Marvel in 2017. I remember reading an article. I think it was 10 out of the 12 months of 2017. Marvel had a PR disaster in 10 out of 12 months. It was not a good year for Marvel for multiple reasons. So we're into September 2018. In your opinion, what are some of the things that Marvel has continued to struggle with versus some of the things maybe they've gotten right in the 2 years?
I think Marvel in general hasn't changed like at all. They changed the editor, but it seems to have been a very superficial change. And I'm not saying CB Cebulski is not a capable guy. I think he is. But the current environment and how stuff is managed, and having people over you like the executives, Sana Amanat, who has been one of the main causes of all this disillusion with Marvel, is still above CB Cebulski. I mean, he's the editor, but she's executive. So I don't think things are going to change. And I think lately we've seen a lot of desperation coming from that from that Marvel staff, and I think it's because I don't know if many of you guys know, but the fiscal year audits are happening right now, and they end on September 30th. And on the first days of October, they release the report for the stockholders. Last year, a week after that report came out, that's when Axel Alonso got fired, and I predicted this like what 9 months before it happened.
You did. I can vouch for that because you and I we regularly direct message on Twitter, and you did.
We were hanging with Captain Cummings even before everybody called it Comicsgate or whatever.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And yeah, you definitely called it. But I just wanna back you up if I can, Spike, because you said something very interesting, and I was wondering if you could give a specific example. And I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but
maybe it's okay, man.
Maybe I do a little bit want to put you on the spot, because when you say that they're still desperate, because could you give me an example of what you mean by Marvel still kind of being desperate? Because I find, again, I have this spirit of optimism, and most of it's centered around Donny Cates, and I'll grant you that most of it's Donny Cates centric, the titles that I'm enjoying. But like, when you say desperate, could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, for example, you have a disastrous year, 2017, and what do? You try to bring back the characters that contributed to this disaster, like Iceman, like Wasp is coming back, and it seems like there's no. I mean, there are books like, for example, everybody loved, I think, Saladin Ahmed's what was it? Black Bolt. And
right,
the guy has gotten worse from what I hear, and he has gotten more preachy. And I do think Donny Cates is a talent. It's a credit for Marvel, and they did do good by keeping him around. In spite of all these scandals around him, I think he's a talent. He's doing his work. The problem is, I don't think they are incentivizing a lot of it. For example, Ta-Nehisi Coates, I think he has gotten better. I only read his first Captain America comic book, and the free the free comic book day one.
Yeah.
The writing is okay. Yeah, it's fine. The thing is, it's still the propaganda. If you know a lot about politics, you spot like that the propaganda. You have these Russia bots clones with the American flag on their face. Those new they're basically an analogy for Russia bots, and it's like, I thought we were over this.
Yeah, it's I definitely I can certainly vouch for I've read Ta-Nehisi Coates, reading his first 3 issues of Captain America. There's no question that there's politics in there, and it's interesting that when they brought in Hydra's been defeated, but Hydra's been replaced by the power elite, and it's interesting that the power elite, it's very interesting that they say that when Hydra was in control of America, Ta-Nehisi Coates, I'm going to butcher that name, he specifically states in the story that everyone had a job, everyone seemed to be kind of happy, but behind the scenes it was evil, and almost suggesting the allegory to the current state with Donald Trump right now in the United States. It's the symbolism is obvious, that just like in the United States now, we got a great economy, it's doing great, but it's Donald Trump, right? So Donald Trump is bad. And so there you can draw that analogy with Ta-Nehisi Coates with Captain America, saying that the power elite has overtaken Hydra, but power elite, it's a good thing they did because everyone has a job and they're happy, but there's something nefarious going on behind the scenes. So
I could even agree at the point that if we go to macroeconomics and stuff, if we start talking about politics, I can tell you, I mean, what Donald Trump has is like a little boost done because people are having temporary jobs, but that doesn't mean that they are employed like for the long run. And this hasn't even been a Donald Trump problem. This happened to Obama as well. But the thing coming back to comics is that you are commenting on I mean, this guy Ta-Nehisi Coates actually writes for or used to write for actual news publications. Why don't you keep that shit there and you try to make a coherent story? Like if I wanted to read about economy, I wouldn't pick a Captain America book, dude. Like seriously.
Yeah.
It's what these people don't. If I want to read Marx, it's a public domain book I can download any day of the week. I don't need you to regurgitate Marx to me.
Right. Well, what would you say to the argument though? Because Ta-Nehisi Coates also writes Captain America, or pardon me, Black Panther, and right now in Black Panther he's got the intergalactic country of Wakanda, which is basically afloat. Wakanda's in space now, and it's almost like he's incorporating intergalactic slavery. And so that's also political, Black Panther. What do you say to the argument that that Marvel is this? Marvel is the world outside your window. And if the world outside our window happens to be toxic and political, what's wrong with our comic books being that way? How do you?
But because I don't think these people open their doors and walk to their neighbors, and their neighbors happen to be Donald Trump. That's fucking bullshit. When you wake up, you see your family, you see your friends, you see your coworkers, you see the everyday life. And comics, interesting comics, usually go about the everyday life of characters. Like Watchmen is, I mean, it's a very fantastical everyday life, but it's about their everyday life. And I'm not opposed to political themes when done in a literary way, and that's I was trying to explain this to Matt Rosenberg earlier today. Like the thing is, when you write, and he gives the example of you have comics like V for Vendetta. The thing about V for Vendetta, it's a very dialectic comic book in the sense that even V tells you. And I sent him the screen cap from the movie that he's doing the devil's deed, even if he's treated like a hero, because there are no heroes. It's a dialectic. When you see the Chancellor give his reasons why he made the country that way in the comic book, he has a powerful argument. He talks about, and I'm not saying I agree with him. It just makes you think. Right. He says something akin to, these people want freedom. Should I give them the freedom to starve, the freedom to suffer, the freedom to, he's not a two-dimensional cartoon from the 50s, like a 50s evil doctor supervillain, like they are trying to paint the world is. That's not the world we live in.
Well, you're talking about, just to be clear for those watching, you're talking about Alan Moore's V for Vendetta, right?
Yeah, of course.
I read both the comic and I watched the movie, and what I really enjoyed about the comic, and I thought the movie, I thought the comic was more thought provoking than the movie, but I thought the movie was well done as well. Yeah. I thought, even though, and I think the way I would phrase it in hearing you talk about it is, when I was finished reading V for Vendetta, I felt philosophically like I was enlightened philosophically on things that happen to be political.
I think more than that, the fact is that you were invited to be a part of the story and thinking about, well, if I lived in this world, what would my position be? And it wouldn't be like a simple, these are the evil guys and these are the bad guys. It's like chaotic, but it invites you to be part of the conversation. And that's not what propaganda does. The propaganda only tells you how to think.
What about this? Because this is an argument that I find compelling, and maybe you'll disagree with me. But I do think that, I mean, I've heard it said before, and I think there's some truth to this. That and I'm gonna make that comparison. God forbid, I'm gonna mention Secret Empire, but yeah. It's been said before that if Secret Empire had been written 10 years ago, it'd have been considered an epic blockbuster, and it would have been much better received. The timing of Secret Empire was terrible. It coincided with the election of Donald Trump, more or less, the culture war. I mean, do you think there's, what do you think of the argument that the timing of a comic book story is important as well in terms of how it's going to be received?
I think it is, but I don't think that applies to Secret Empire. Like 10 years ago, I was reading, for example, what was out, and I was reading a lot of Marvel by that time because I always was more leaning to Marvel than anything else. I was reading the X-Men line. The X-Men line across the board was solid, and it was a Messiah Complex crossover, which is very good and very consistent. The thing about Secret Empire is that even if you stripe away the politics, it just looks like a desperately made comic in the sense that they couldn't even get a main artist. I mean, the only thing that was consistent from the beginning to the end was Mark Brooks's art, as a cover artist, and
Right.
he actually left Marvel after that thing was finished. If you buy Secret Empire compilations now, it looks shitty because the middle story, even if you forget about the tie-ins, just the Secret Empire line had like 20, 30 different creators in it, and they were just all over the fucking place. And
Well, so let me just focus your thoughts for a bit, because what I'm getting at is I'm well aware, and it had a lot of offshoots, but as a story, like specifically as a story and what it had to say, do you think it worked as a story? Like just in terms of the message that it had, do you think it worked or not? I think I know the answer to this, but because obviously, leave aside the art for a second. Like narratively as a story, did it would the message of Secret Empire in terms of what it was trying to say, would it have worked, or maybe maybe it was a message that was better heard if it was written post World War II as opposed to now?
Well, I don't think that comic could have existed back then, because back then Trump derangement syndrome didn't exist, and that was the only reason for this comic to exist. And it's not that Nick Spencer is a bad writer. I know he knows stuff. He has worked with friends of mine like Paco Medina. I actually presented when they were working together in Ultimate Comics X-Men. I presented that comic with Paco at our local comic store here in Mexico City. And the thing is, his premise was, let's take the Avatar of America and make him a Nazi, because that's what America has always been, because Trump won.
Mm.
That wasn't a priority when the guy was making Ultimate Comics X-Men, and it was fairly, it had its commentary, but you were talking in a broader sense of the way about people who are rejected and try to fit in the world. You didn't have this very, very obvious allegory to your personal politics, and that's the problem with propaganda, when you make your personal politics the main character.
Yeah, I've been asking you the questions. I haven't been volunteering a lot of my own opinion. I do think while I enjoyed the journey of Secret Empire, I didn't like the way it ended, and I clearly admit that it had its flaws. I am one, though. I do believe it's going to be better received, and probably in the future than it was when it concurrently when it was running. But I want to ask you another question now. Mark Waid made some interesting comments. He gave an interview to John Seitzis on Word Balloon, and Mark Waid all but admitted that Marvel had dropped the ball in 2017 in terms of the timing. He sort of sidestepped the Comicsgate controversy, and he admitted that the mistake Marvel made was the mistake that all comic skaters complained about, and ultimately were somehow accused of being bigots and racist for. And that is that, I mean, he admitted that Marvel had sidelined their classic characters all at the same time, and the timing really sucked. All of a sudden, you can't see your classic characters. Riri Williams replaced Iron Man, the drill. Jane Foster replaced the Thor, and the female Hawkeye replaced the male Hawkeye, and all at the same time. And what I find interesting, and this is why, getting to my earlier comment with you, when I want to press you a bit on this, is because
sure.
I look at 2018, and I see Marvel writing the ship. They sort of righted the ship on that aspect of it. And like, even with the new West Coast Avengers, which, there seems to be, if I'm my own read of Twitter and YouTube is that a lot of people, particularly comic skaters, I think tend to they tend not to like the new West Coast Avengers. But I actually look at West Coast Avengers as a good example of what Marvel is doing right, because they're taking those they're taking those characters and they're giving them their own comic. Riri Williams is going to be on the West Coast Avengers, or on the Champions, or they're doing it kind of like DC. They're not going to have the classic characters replaced. They're going to like give those newer characters their own comic book, and if they're good enough and written well enough, they're going to grow organically on their own. And I think that's the right way to do it. And so, in that respect, don't you think Marvel's doing that right? Or what am I?
No, I even think Mark, in his analysis of the situation, missed the point, because we used to have the same editor. I've met Mark personally. He knows me. I knew his ex-girlfriend.
Okay. I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
No. I mean, she's a lovely lady. She's a feminist, but she's a reasonable one. And no, but it was around the time he was doing his Daredevil run, and you can read, like, for example, what was it? I think it was issue 2, where he has this issue with Captain America, and he's Captain America then, and he's Captain America after. Even though it's Steve Rogers, both of them, completely different approach to them. Yeah. And that you may say, well, of course it's another story, but I'm saying in what Captain America meant to Mark back in 2014, and what he meant for him in his latest run, you can tell it's night and day. And this didn't happen in 2017. It was the breaking point. But these problems were a lot of editors who know nothing about comics. That's basically the reason we had Secret Wars. They had to throw away everything, and they said, we are destroying both the Ultimate continuity and the 616 continuity. They just weren't doing it even as well as they planned to, and they just started calling it 616 again. Yeah. And they just use randomly whatever continuity suits their fancy. And the problem is editorial, because a franchise comic is only as good as your editors. And I've made a video where I showed you how they picked their editors from LinkedIn, regardless of their experience making comic books and making art. I mean, I cannot just grab my mom and make her, put her into a death metal band. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it's you make an interesting reference. I remember that video you did on LinkedIn, and I also noticed that on Twitter. I just want to get your comment on this, because I find it interesting. I know that on what happened on Twitter was there's a lot of creators got on there and they defended Marvel's hiring of I forget the woman.
Eve Ewing.
Yes, they defended her hire. And what's she writing again? I'm sorry. What comic is she? She's writing Riri Williams, right?
Yeah.
Right. Ironheart. She's writing the Ironheart series, and I was. It appeared to me that there was a great deal. Neil Gaiman, in particular, got into a shouting match with a lot of his fans. He was correcting a lot of his fans who accused Neil Gaiman himself of not knowing his own career. And let's just say that, the whole thing sort of blew up. And I know I can only imagine how it feels if you're someone who's had many years experience in the comic industry and you're passed over and a complete newbie is given the chance. But what's your feeling on that whole thing, Spike? Because you're someone who...
I was in the middle of that, because it was me replying to Kurt Busiek that got TV Zabolski to call me a liar.
Oh, okay. So, I didn't know that was the timeline on that. I don't want to judge up something.
And after that was when Neil Gaiman jumped in. The way I see it, first, they are making false analogies, because they are implying that there is no meritocracy when there is, and they betray themselves. Like, they say, oh, we didn't all start, we started making a comic book sometime, but what Kurt Busiek wasn't saying is how he pitched for years to DC Comics and didn't got a publication until after years of pitching to them. and it's known that Alan Moore did teach Neil Gaiman how to write comic book scripts. He even said so in the thing. I mean, they are being disingenuous, I think, for ideological reasons. Especially because, for example, take Neil Gaiman's wife is a very known rabid feminist. So it's not devoid. And the other thing is, I'm not gonna say, but I know a lot of people in comics today working at Marvel and DC who didn't like this, who thought their work and how the comic industry it has their artist was diminished. You can go, for example, I even retweeted this. Humberto Ramos was saying, knowing people will only take you so far, but it won't make your career because you need to be good. Knowing people just gets you in, but it doesn't like lets you live in the building.
Right. Well, I mean, what I choose to believe and what I truly believe is the case, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong and maybe I'm naive and maybe you'll tell me I'm naive, but let's say this. I mean, if this Miss Ewing or whatever her name is, if she's not very good at what she does, I mean, the marketplace is going to, at some point, she's not going to be hired again. She's going to be let go. She'll have had her chance. Marvel will have had their check mark, and that'll be the end of it. If she happens to be good and the sales are great, well, then she'll have a career. And I guess, I
understand what you're saying, and that's something that I've heard before. The thing is, I think it's a little bit short-sighted because why don't you, if you must, and I said this, and I actually talked to her months ago, and even the Quartering made a video about my conversation regarding her Change.org petition. If you must hire someone because they look like the character, why don't you go to comic book conventions, to the artist alley, find that black lady who has been trying to break into comics for years? Why do you have to pick a random that made a Change.org? And I even made fun of Ricky Bourdain, who is the talent manager, who was saying he was going to some convention to check portfolios. And I said, why do you need to go? Just ask them to put their Change.org petition and the character they look like. That's what you're doing right now. Because I think the problem is that they are not looking at is there's people from all races, from all sexual preference, whatever, busting their asses to get good at the craft. They are going to conventions. They are investing time and money.
Yeah.
And I think it's insulting for them that Marvel just hires some woman.
You know what? I'm completely inclined to agree with you. I really am. And I shouldn't even say inclined. I do agree with you. And especially as a regular goer to comic book conventions, I see people in Artist Row, and I see people struggling financially, and I've overpaid for art because I felt sorry for people on Artist Row but I admire their work ethic, and they're there and they're sacrificing and they're passionate about what they do. And I'd be lying that if I didn't say it bothered me a little bit to know that somebody was getting a job in an industry where they didn't pay their dues. And I mean, we're all for luck and we're all for the big break, but I agree with you. I felt that it was, I don't know what the logical argument, the flaw argument is, but what a lot of those creators, when they were talking about how, I got my big break this way, I never had any experience. And then when they would tell their story, it was obvious that they did have experience. It was obvious that they did pay their dues. Even Neil Gaiman's story, it wasn't like a complete walk-in off the street. I mean, he'd had a lot of contacts in the industry, and a lot of the other ones too. It seemed a little bit like they were sort of like bending the truth a little bit and focusing on the look, I can remember when I was I remember I was a struggling student before I got my big break, before I got my articling position, and but I mean, it's not like I didn't have any experience, but anyways, I digress a bit here. I want to ask you, now we have that Miss Ewing woman there on Ironheart. I wish her the best. I hope she's successful because we don't, we wish all the best for everybody. Comic books are great. We want all comic books to thrive, and we want the industry to be vibrant. But what do you know about the Chelsea Kane controversy? Because I found it very surprising that Marvel put a kibosh on the Vision series that was written by Chelsea Kane and her husband, and they already had 4 issues completed, and Marvel basically ended the series, and they're not even bothering to publish it. What do you know about that?
It's not even the first time. I mean, even the Ewing thing is not really the first time it happens. The woman, America Chavez, was written by a total new. The latest Runaways train wreck was written by someone who's never have shown interest in comics, etc., etc.
Rainbow, I think her name is Rainbow.
Yeah, something. Yeah. Even the editors, I would say it's Anna Amenet. I don't know where she came from. Like, she just appeared one day at Marvel, it seems. But the thing is, I
asked you about Chelsea Kane.
Oh yeah, I know, but I'm trying to think, because I read the article. The article was pretty much her being pissed, and I can get where she gets pissed, but I also consider her to be one of the people who suddenly wanted to be a comic book writer because it sounds cool. Right. But they managed to piss her too, and I even commented yesterday. I retweeted what he was saying, and I'm saying, like, it happened to me. And if you go to Kelly Sue the Comics Tumblr, you can see her post about her fight with Tom Brevoort, because it's. I mean, yes, there's an SJW problem, but most of the problem is the work ethics and the nepotism and the corporativism at Marvel. I'm guessing Chelsea Kane got tired with how the editorial worked, and pushing deadlines and the little pay you get for your pages and stuff like that, or being completely ignored. I know for a fact the editors do things last second, even if you deliver the script months before.
Yeah,
they call you on a Friday night because that's when they decided to open the thing, the file. It's hard to tell what happened with her, but her reaction is nothing new. I'm guessing everybody who has left Marvel had a similar reaction.
Well, it seemed odd to me, because my understanding is that apparently Chelsea Kane was hired to write the Vision 6-issue series.
Yeah, with the daughter.
After Tom King. That was even before Tom King's Vision series was completed. And this apparently they've been working on this thing for 2 years. And so let me ask you this question, Spike. Is it unfair? Because some people on Twitter are it's my pet peeve when people make huge assumptions, and well, I probably make them too, and people can correct me if I am, but a lot of people are making the assumption that Chelsea Kane, she was working on this for 2 years, that Marvel finally put their foot down, and they, some people are looking at this positively and saying, Marvel, this must have been a garbage story because it was written by Chelsea Kane. They finally had enough of it. Is it possible, there's 2 schools of thought. That number one, this was a terrible story. Marvel finally put their foot down and said, you know what? This story sucks. It's not going to fit in with Marvel continuity. We don't want it anymore. And then the other side of the story is, well, the corporativism that you talked about. So,
I think, a lot of people want to think that it's Marvel putting their foot down, but I don't think that was it. Even if I heard someone say that it was because her delays, because she only made 4 issues in 3 years, but I don't think that was, that did happen, but I don't think it was because of her decision to be late. There are always mitigating factors, and these are the same people who let her write 8 issues of Mockingbird, which sucked as well. So what's the difference? Nobody's going to read it anyway. That's basically what they're thinking, because even the scholastic excuse is dead today, because we know that all the lies they were saying about, we sell a lot in the scholastic and stuff. They sold a lot of bulk at discount price that wasn't profitable enough for Marvel to want to produce it. So they sold the license to IDW, who's basically have to buy it for cheap, because they are struggling a lot with money right now. So that's how profitable it was to have those kinds of books. I think what happened was an inside thing, and I'm guessing she wanted more money because it's a really underpaid business. Yeah. And being a freelance for Marvel doesn't. This thing is diversity in comics. When he says this, he's entirely correct. Making a book here and there and then not having an income for a year until they decide somehow to throw you another book is, why bother?
Yeah. I gotta, well, thank you for that, Spike. I'm going to switch gears now. And sure. I was wondering, I thought it was very interesting because I remember it was last week, I believe, Joe Quesada responded and he actually sort of, I don't know who invited who. He sort of, Joe Quesada suggested he wanted to tweet with Diversity in Comics, and Diversity in Comics basically said, yeah, go ahead, ask, let's tweet back and forth.
Wasn't it Ethan Van Sciver?
Well, Joe Quesada, I was actually up late that early morning. Joe Quesada, Joe Quesada, I got the impression he was about to go to bed. And Diversity in Comics actually said, well, I'm right here. You can talk directly to me. And then Joe Quesada did a series of tweets, and it was to Diversity in Comics. I want to be clear. Maybe Joe Quesada has also tweeted even Van Sciver. I don't know. But in any event, I was wondering if you read those tweets, because Joe Quesada, and I just want to preface this here, and this is going to be a long question, so bear with me.
Yeah.
Joe Quesada very clearly is trying to sort of smooth over the waters and sort of, Joe Quesada's intention clearly is to try to lower the tension on the comic culture war and saying, look, we're all in this together. And he had some nice things to say about Diversity in Comics, military background. And he was clearly trying to sort of alleviate the waters and everything. And, but at the same time, he did suggest, he did poke the bear a little bit. And I'm always reminded that Joe Quesada was the same guy who, with another well-known former Marvel editor, is well known for being particularly vocal back in 2004 or 2002 it was, comparing DC Comics to Superman and Batman. He compared DC Comics to like a porn star with a big DICK and didn't know what to do with it. So Joe Quesada has gone through a period of his life where he's been an a-hole to his competition. And I thought it was interesting that maybe he's gotten something from that, and he's called back in. Joe Quesada's called back in at the tail end of 2017. Marvel's had a disastrous year. Joe Quesada, the creator, chief creative officer, basically was designing amusement parks. Suddenly he's called back to give lectures to the new editors at Marvel. And now he's trying to sort of calm the waters on Twitter. And I actually thought that what he tweeted, I didn't think it was that bad. I actually thought it wasn't, because nothing really has come of it. But I was just wondering what your perspective is on that, or do you think that was... I
read it as loving, to be honest. It was just loving. And the thing is, like you say, why do you have to teach editors how to do their job? And it's not the first time. I think I've shown you Tom Brewer tweeting out how they hired Klaus Janson to tell them what inking was. I can link you to the tweet. It exists today. And that was in 2012 when they started hiring all of Stephen Walker's friends. And do you remember that time we had a fight with Tom Brewer?
I remember that was over. Wasn't that over the editorial mistakes for, I think it was Secret Empire in issue 3 or 4 or something like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
and I brought this up, the Stephen Walker thing and hiring his friends, and even Nick Lowe came in and, but that guy doesn't work for us anymore. Yeah, but it doesn't matter if you keep doing it.
Yeah.
And I think what happened with Joe Quesada, and I think this is part of Desperate Marvel right now, because they are on audits right now. Joe Quesada, as an executive of the chief creative officer, he hasn't put a lot of attention in comics by his own admission since like 2010.
Yeah.
And it shows because the guy was good. I do think the guy was good, and I really enjoyed the Marvel Knights line. He had his controversy with One More Day, but if you take One More Day out of the equation, it was home run after home run.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Yeah, Joe Quesada definitely made a mark. Him and Jimmy Palmiotti. I mean, basically, they
revealed Marvel. They revealed Marvel.
Yeah, that with Marvel Knights, Daredevil, Marvel Knights, and that was I think that was in 2002, wasn't it? I think it was
98 from 98 to 2010 or something like it.
But yeah, well, one of the things I understand. Am I imagining things? But are they not trying to bring Marvel Knights back? Are they? Or am I wrong on that?
They are trying to bring Marvel Knights back the same way they tried to bring Secret Wars back. It's not the same thing. It's actually the second time they tried to bring it back. Nobody remembers because those comics sucked back in 2013. Every single one of them was the worst thing I read that year. Like the Spider-Man one is literally unreadable. It has no panels. It's like a hipster fucking LSD trip, and I mean it. Like you can look at it. I'll offer to send it to you. I don't want them in my house. I'm going to review them because I don't want that in my house. They are so bad. I don't want them in my house.
Let me ask you this. You've made a Sugar Cat in the live stream. She said, she asks, is Joe Quesada the right person to talk about these issues? Are there Marvel stockholders who would be more interested in calming any controversies? And then, so, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you've made that comment before, Spike, and I don't pretend to be an expert on how that all works corporate, but and maybe, well, I don't know, maybe you are. I'm just asking your opinion, but how does that work? I mean, how much power? So, I mean, you drew the timeline that you're saying it's no coincidence that Axel Alonso got fired like within a month after the year end. So basically, you're saying point blank,
not only that, I was at a con talking to, I'm gonna say someone at DC con here in Mexico City. We're talking about the same thing because when you know how a business works, like you're a lawyer, you can read a room when it comes to, I don't know, the jury's thinking something or the judge or whatever. Or
I like to think so, but the reason why I made that clarification is that I'm not a corporate lawyer. I don't pretend to know the ins and outs of corporate law.
No, but and I'm not corporate. I mean, I know stuff from the industry because some of these people are still my friends. People who are working on SJW books at Marvel call me at night.
Yeah.
Because what they don't get, it's like, I'm gonna tell you something someone told me. The editors at Marvel can say what they want, but I know you since you were a fucking kid. I know who you are. I'm obviously not gonna pick an editor from Marvel over you. I know these. I've known these people. I mean, like I said, I know these people's families. I have dinner with them. So when you know about how the corporate side of comics work and stuff, it's desperate in the sense that it was desperate back in the late 90s. How there was a revolving door with editors and stuff when Marvel was breaking down. And regarding the stockholders, the thing about upper management at Disney is that they don't even know what goes on. I mean, I don't think Ike Perlmutter knows what Comicsgate is. There's a disconnect, and the only time they connect is through the numbers that they audit for these fiscal reports. That's the thing.
Well, I think, yeah, I think that I think you're right on that. And one of the things that I find so, to me, what Marvel's doing right now is they very clearly know what makes money. Right now, what makes money? 2 words: Donnie Cates. And Donny Cates is a white male, and he he just loves comic books, and he's like a Jeff Johns. He knows continuity. He just intuitively knows what he's doing. And I say he's a white male, and I say those provocative words on purpose, not to provoke, but just for emphasis, because I find it interesting that very clearly what's making Marvel successful right now and all their best press is Donny Cates titles. And yet they'll turn around and it's like but yet they'll also have, very clearly Marvel they do have that side where, for PR purposes, clearly, and I don't disagree with it. I actually think that it's wonderful that they want to, and maybe you can disagree with me on this, but I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit of a suck, but I kind of like, okay, you like Riri Williams, you want to put an African-American writer on her. Okay, that's fine. You want to, and if you're going to take a chance on a new writer, do it give her Riri Williams, inspire her to be a breakout writer. Okay. But I find it interesting that Marvel, in many ways, they'll ride the wave of political correctness, and yet their bottom line, what makes them the money, is the white male, is everything but. You know what I mean? And so
no, yeah, I understand. And even with that example with Riri Williams, by her own admission, this has been months of preparation of teaching this woman how to make a story. That's resources they've been accommodating to this book that is probably not going to sell.
Yeah.
Why didn't you at least try to hire someone who you didn't have to invest that much money? If you're going to give the chance, for example, one of my favorite editors in the business is Matt Hawking from Top Cow. What he used to do was make annual talent hunts and ask for pitches and ask for pages and stuff like that from around the world. And this is the guy who broke out guys like Stjepan Sajic, who you may know for those Hawkman and,
Sunstone, and yeah.
The guy's a fucking genius. That's how you do things in comics. I mean, you desperately want to fill the quota with a black woman. Make an open call for pitches. We're going to make this Riri Williams book, and we're hunting for talent, to break the fucking glass ceiling or whatever. Send us your pitch. Who knows? You may find a fucking genius pitch, and it turns out that Riri Williams is the hottest new character in town. But you are not making that environment happen, and you need a correct environment to make a comic book. Well, that's why I'm not pushing to just have anyone make my comics, because I want my comics to be good. I don't want them to be just some comics.
Yeah, and I agree. And to be honest with you, Spike, I've one of the reasons why I enjoy these talks with you, and the reason why I was inclined to just speak with you on this stream and not have others on it was because I wanted to focus in on this. And this is a point it's extremely touchy with a lot of people. Because if you try to have this conversation with too many, there's a lot of people that will hear this conversation, and like I'm all for. There's nothing I would love more than to have all ethnicities and everyone joining hands in a circle, drinking Coca-Cola, singing Kumbaya, the world's all great and roses and all that. But the reality is at the end of the day, if we just focus on great stories, then that's what's ultimately that's ultimately what brings the world closer. It's the stories, the best stories. Do you know what? Like, I'm halfway through. If I'm halfway through War and Peace, you know what? I don't even know who wrote War and Peace. I don't even know what color his or her skin was. I don't care. It's a good story. And this is the thing is, and that's what's a little bit frustrating about this, is that when Marvel focuses on this, and it's always interesting that when they'll focus on their new writer, it's always interesting that when they describe the writer, somehow the ethnicity of the writer will always make its way into the advertisement. And it's like, why not just let the work speak for itself? And why not because to me, if you're gonna focus on Riri Williams and have a good story about her, like you said, why waste resources? when training somebody who doesn't know how to write. I'm not saying she doesn't know how to write. I don't know that as a fact, but why not? If you got a whole echelon, it boggles my mind that you would that they would do that. But I don't know. I think, see, just let me say something about affirmative action, and I want to say something about my country, Canada. In Canada, affirmative action, that is the practice of hiring somebody, of having a quota, of hiring specific people based on their race, having a quota for that. That's something that's actually entrenched in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's justified. So in Canada, at least, we as a country, since 1982, we've embraced that. Now, it doesn't mean that all of us agree with it. And there's even an argument to take it out of our charter because we feel that we've gone beyond it. But I say that because I'm sympathetic to a degree. And that's just how I was, I can get it. But, more and more, the problem is that we're living in a world now where if we thought we were multicultural 10 years ago, we are far more multicultural now because everyone is talking about it. And in our legal system, more and more people are getting away with not having to do all kinds of work because of the color of their skin, not in spite of it. And that's a huge controversy. And it's not just comic books. It's many, many other areas of law as well. And it's a trend that I think, everybody likes going on Twitter, and every creator, it's the easiest thing in the world. I mean, it's a cop-out to go on Twitter and to say, oh, well, I'm against bigotry, hateful. Well, no shit, Sherlock.
Yeah,
Is there anybody in their dog that is going to go on Twitter and say, no, I'm all for bigotry and hateful, and I'm give me a break. To me, it's a cop-out. Like, actually address the controversy. If a creator wants to impress me on Twitter, okay, go on there and actually address the topic, and as opposed to avoiding it and making up what you think Comicsgate is about, and then attacking what you've just made up.
That's how Sean Murphy made his money with White Knight. That's exactly what Sean did.
Could you elaborate on that, Spike?
I mean, I think it was CBR, or I think all of them did, but CBR started the trend of making White Knight to sound like an SJW comic book, and I think it was Crumple Point who went to Sean Murphy's Twitter and said, "Hey, man, I want to know what about this book and that book." And Sean Murphy said, "They are misconstruing me because this book is not SJW. This book is not anti-SJW. This book is this book, and I want to tell this story." And people, when they saw that, everybody gave. I wasn't actually going to. I didn't plan to buy it, and I have all of them. And I think it was this disposition to have a conversation and to say, look, I have my own things which I believe them in, but we are here to talk about comics. I think it was that has made Sean Murphy one of the most profitable names of DC. And I had guys like Tim Seeley told me, like, this guy's making a shitload of money because of this. Not he didn't tell me because of this, but he told me, Sean Murphy's making a shitload of money and everybody at DC is happy with him because he is not, in spite of people SJW still attacking him, he hasn't been an asshole to anyone. He just wants to keep to himself. He tweets out his artwork. He talks about his comics. He has great disposition.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I'm actually glad to hear that when you say about what's going on behind the scenes there, and that because I love Batman White Knight. I thought it was enjoyable. I love how he interacts with fans, and I have to say though, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this stream just sort of like one-on-one basically, because while there's a little bit of egocentrism there, I want to be able to talk more. Also, I actually find that with more and more people just keeping their mouths shut, because so many of these creators, if they do actually have views that I disagree with, that's okay. But I kind of do agree with the principle that if you don't have anything nice to say, shut up. You know, just do your work. If you make a lot of money and people buy your comic book, that's good. Like, but don't pass judgment, especially don't pass judgment on your fans. And that's one of the things where I really enjoy the interaction. You know, I like that, you know, guys like Scott Snyder, for example, although he did recently get on the bandwagon with the Comicsgate, that's fine. For the most part, he's interacting with his fans on YouTube. He wanted to, he was concerned that people didn't understand what was happening in Justice League. He puts his heart and soul into it. Even though I might have issues with it, I love the fact that he created his own YouTube channel just to explain himself and explain what he was trying to do. I mean, that I love that. He's an awesome guy. I don't care if I agree with his politics. I don't care. I love that, and I'm seeing that more and more. And what in particular, I will give a shout out to Ethan Van Sciver. I don't even, to be honest with you, I don't even know if I agree with Ethan Van Sciver's politics because I don't watch his channel all the time. But I admire the fact that he had the chutzpah to go on YouTube and he's speaking with his voice. If you like him, you like him. If you don't, you don't. He's unapologetic. He's got a huge following. And what I hope is that he inspires other creators to do what he's done. You know, put your voice out there. You know, there's, you know, you can't be afraid of, you know, you right now, this idea that, you know, I want everybody to like me. It's sort of like Sally Field accepting the Academy Award. You know, it's like, they like me. They really, really like me. It's like, you know, just get out there and do your stuff and let your work speak for itself. And what I like about 2018 that's different than 2017 is that more and more creators are they're avoiding the politics on Twitter. Most of them are. And they're interacting positively with fans. I don't know about you, Spike, but maybe you'll disagree with me, but I think Twitter's more positive than it was in 2017. It's still it's got its low points, but it's better than it was in 2017. Do you agree?
I think Twitter just is what you want your timeline to be. Timelines are not a democracy, but what you say is true, and I've said I told this so many times. Like, if you count the anti-Comicsgate crowd, really is like 20 people out of the entire industry. Most of the people are just focusing on whatever else, and if they talk something about it, they talk it privately with people they know.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't know if it has gone better or worse in the sense of the Comicsgate hashtag, because, you know, there's a lot of like this kid today actually agreed with me, but he was anti-Comicsgate. Yeah. Just because Gail Simone and a list of people he likes are, you know, anti-Comicsgate. And I was saying, hear what you're saying. You stopped buying Marvel because you didn't like them, but you agree with them? That doesn't make any sense. You are saying you agree with them, but you're making the Comicsgate actions. So, in fact, I will say this: you don't have to be Comicsgate. Just buy whatever you like. Just wallet mode. That's it.
Yeah.
I think the thing about Comicsgate is Comicsgate is an amorphous mass of consumers, and we happened to exist before there was a Comicsgate tag, and we were, you know, just the guys who hung around Captain Cummings and all those channels that were popping out back then and stuff. It's like talking about grunge. I mean, Nirvana and Pearl Jam did, well, we're grunge. We're a bunch of grunge. Just something that happened to happen at that place at that time.
Yeah, and you know what bothers me so much, Spike, is I know exactly what you're saying, and you know what's heartbreaking to me, and I could, if I was an emotional guy, if there was one thing that could make me cry, it would be this. It's like my heart and soul is comic books. You know, I'm going to turn 50 in January. I've collected comics since I was 7 years old. I love comic books, and up until this last year, it never occurred to me. I never thought of myself as a bigot or a racist or anything else until suddenly, you know, in 2017, I got onto YouTube and I just suddenly discovered that, you know, I was a DC guy and I noticed all my Marvel friends in the comic shop, they were starting to complain more and more and more. And, you know, and I got into Secret Empire. And that's the irony, is that everybody hates Secret Empire.
I think it's funny because, yeah, Marvel has worked for you, and more power to you.
I know, but my point is this. I'm trying to be. I'll try to get to my point quick here. Is that I really sympathized with my Marvel zombie friends, and especially, and then I got to meet Twitter friends like yourself and Captain Cummings and what have you, and hey, look, we all have our flaws. I mean, good Lord, we joke around, we say things that we probably wouldn't say publicly because it's not, you know, because we're just shooting the shit. We're like, you know, we're having a drink. I'm even drinking while I'm doing this. I mean, hey, you know, we're having fun. But, you know, look, I've lost count with the number of people I personally got into comic books. I'm not bragging. It's just what I do. I love comics. I give comics away. It's what I do for a living. And what bothers me about 2017 and 2018 is we get these fly-by-night people with an agenda. You know, suddenly judging me, you know, telling me that I don't, first of all, that I don't know how to read comics, that I don't know how to review comics, that I don't know what I'm talking about, that I'm a racist, that I'm a bigot. And all I did was that I jumped on the bandwagon because I wanted to, because I noticed that, yes, Marvel was making an editorial mistake in not focusing on their classic characters, and that they should maybe right the ship a little bit. And unfortunately, because certain characters happen to be a different ethnicity, suddenly it became something different. And that's what I highly resented. And it is part of this larger culture war. And I think we're all the victim of it. We are all the victim of it. And look, I'm not a snowflake. And I don't think anyone else is too, even though I'll call all kinds of people snowflakes. It's just, the whole thing is very frustrating to me. And, you know, on my channel, you know, and maybe people will get the wrong impression of my channel reading this, as, you know, I just review comic books, but I'd be the first to admit that I get very, very, very upset when I hear somebody attacks somebody on Comicsgate and, you know, just assumes that they know what Comicsgate is. Every creator that I know, let me rephrase that. Every creator that I see on Twitter that, you know, Comicsgate now has become associated with bigotry and hatefulness. And that's what I don't like. And they've gotten even, because let's quid pro quo here. The phrase SJW used to be social justice warrior. That has a negative association too. So we're in a situation now where we've had such a toxic culture war. Two phrases that used to have a positive meaning, social justice warrior, or at least on the surface had a positive meaning, yeah, and Comicsgate, now both have been poisoned because we poisoned each other. And it's, I don't know, I just don't like it. And that's why even in my reviews, I try to avoid politics, because, you know, you just get finger pointing at each other, and it's sad, you know. Sorry, I'm on a rant.
Oh, that's fine. Though I think where I disagree is the SJW thing, because its ideology has been a problem since social justice warriors exist, and the problem is that who were the first social justice warriors? You know their names. They are called Hitler, Stalin, whatever. It's a very complex political thing. The problem today here is that when the people around Comicsgate decide they're gonna, okay, you don't want us in the industry, fine, we'll do our own stick. That also became a problem to them, and they went after that. They couldn't just leave us be. And I'm telling you on personal experience, because even me has people who constantly report me on Twitter because of shit, of whatever, and I have them blocked. I don't even interact with these people.
Yeah. That's sad.
The thing is, it goes away the minute they want it to go away. They just stop talking about it, stop fixating on what we're doing, because all of these people obsessed with comics. I mean, I've made this point. diversity in comics doesn't really even use the hashtag. More people that hate Comicsgate use that hashtag. I don't really tweet about Comicsgate all day long.
Oh, I know you don't, and I don't eat. Well, I certainly.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's because, and that's because we're the purists. We actually are the purists. We're the ones that were there at the beginning. We've been doing this for a long time. Well, it's a career for you. It's a lifelong hobby for me, and well, it's also a hobby and a career for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And I'm mindful of the way. By the way, I know what you're alluding to when you talk about SJWism. You've been very I've read your debates on Twitter, and I know when you talk about social justice warrior, I know the roots of social justice warrior SJW going back to Hitler and fascism and what have you. But I think that where I think that most people who think of themselves or who make what we call SJW arguments, I don't think they really appreciate how close they are in terms of their actions to in the past. And you get into the Jordan Peterson debate in his book, the 12
yeah. Wash your dick or whatever.
Yeah. And yeah. But I think that I will defend. Here's where I will defend. There's a certain naivete because with people on the SJWs, most SJWs, they're just doing it because they think that this is just all about being inclusive. We're a multicultural society. Let everybody in. Again, let's hold hands, sing kumbaya. And again, who doesn't agree with that? Good Lord, if my neighbor, I didn't care if he had purple skin and pointed ears. If he was having a party and said it's a block party, I'd go over there and I'd be the first one there holding hands. I mean, this is not rocket science. This nonsense that there's these racist people out there that are going to go and like shun you because you're a nice person. That's nonsense. So they come into this controversy and they right away hear this word Comicsgate. And they think that, this is what Comicsgaters have done. And then they'll be linked to some diversity in comics who's only one spokesman out of many. And usually diversity in comics has gotten a bad rap on multiple levels. and diversity in comics, the problem that he has is that he's got 90,000 followers. And all it takes is for one or two of them to misconstrue or they take what he does and they go to the next level because they want extra subscribers on their channel. So they want to raise the ante a little bit. And then all of a sudden, this movement grows and it becomes worse and worse and worse. And I want to be clear. I don't agree with everything Diversity in Comics says. And in fact, some of the things he says I think have been terrible. But here's what I'm going to say. This guy's not Donald Trump. This isn't a guy that doubles down on crap half the time. And what he doubles down on generally it's stuff he ought to double down on. I mean, a lot of the stuff that Diversity in Comics I find that he does is he'll say something and, he'll say something in the heat of a conversation where, he's done so many videos that he ends up sort of like they got so much ammunition because they take so much out of context. The guy in many ways is the author of his own misfortune. And then when he becomes the face of all of us, like it's very, very unfair. And it's not his fault that he's become the face of Comicsgate. It's not his fault. It's just that he's a convenient scapegoat. And the whole thing just drives me crazy.
Yeah, no, I get it. The problem is, and this is, people talk about Comicsgate, Gamergate. This problem has been around since. Do you remember the Occupy Wall Street protests? Those protests died because of the Marxists who took over them with all these Marxist postmodernists, what have you, hipsterism. The problem is, if you leave it unchecked, you get things like Article 13, which are real problems for everyone. You now have the internet censored basically like China on Europe.
Yeah.
all the people who were against Brexit are turning over, seeing what they provoked. There's reports of people who were like, oh shit, no, I mean, right now I'm pushing for a hard Brexit, even though I was against Brexit, because now that I fucked up, and that's a problem with the SJW ideology, now that I fucked up, I clearly see that naivete was dangerous at the beginning of the 20th century, and it's still dangerous today. That's the difference.
Well, I think you're right on that, and I think part of that is part of this larger culture war. Comicsgate is clearly, in my view, a microcosm of a larger culture war going on right now, and it's all part of the identity politics, and it's something that we have to work through. We have to create a dialogue with each other, and we're gonna have to get through it, and it's gonna take some time. And this is something that hopefully, I'd like to think that maybe the end of 2017 was the worst that it would get, and we're sort of at a healing. And to be honest with you, I kind of like some of the things that, with the behavior of creators on Twitter. I think generally it's been more positive than it has been. I think it's getting better, and I'm hopeful for the future. And that leads me to my question for you, Spike. I'm hopeful. I'm actually optimistic in terms of where comic books are headed as a medium, even if it means it might change. I got the opposite impression from you, but am I wrong on that? How do you feel about the future? Are you optimistic or are you pessimistic, or where do you stand?
There's stuff I definitely look forward to, but I don't know if people share my view on comics, because in that sense, like I'm not an English speaker. My native tongue is Spanish, and I've always been. I've known my mom is European, and I've known I have European comics as well they work mostly artisanally, just like they have worked for decades. How the Indiegogo crowdfunding is working now. The Comicsgate creators, everything between quotation marks, they are just basically catching up to the European model. So options, we have options. The thing is, I think we're just gonna have to learn to live with the classic characters. I think that's the problem is that these characters are looked as costumes. They are looked as products, like Coca-Cola's. Like they are gonna sell because they have like the spider in the chest.
Spike, I want to cut you off there for a second. You talked about the European model. For our viewers, could you describe? And I'm going to confess, also for me, because I'm not entirely clear. When you say European model, can you describe what that is and how it's different than the North American market?
The European albums, they are different because they've always have they are closer to how books like prose books work. You just have like stories, and it's not centralized thematically like North American comics have been for most of their existence. It's more like, those times around the golden age where horror stories and romance and cowboys and whatever, they were more popular even than superheroes. That has always been true in Europe. So
is what you're saying is that Europe is not so focused on superheroes, that their graphic novel market is it more broad than North America? Is that what you're trying to say?
It's not only that, they have actually mostly never been focused on superheroes. Like the classic characters you can name, for example, Asterix or Diabolique, they have nothing to do with superheroes.
And actually Asterix is one of the most. Actually, that's one of the most popular, highest-selling graphic albums ever, is it not?
Yeah, even in Mexico, like in the 50s, when Stan Lee was hiding what his profession was as a comic book writer, we have Yolanda Vargas Dulce, who was a woman who made very successful comics, and she was known internationally for making comics, and her comics got adapted into soap operas that have been adapted all over the world. That's how big thematically, and women and Latin Americans, and it's weird. I guess if I was American I wouldn't believe it, but she was more successful than Stanley and Jack Kirby in the 60s with the Marvel Age.
So
the thing is that there's a micro focus on these two companies that have centralized comics in North America, and that's part of the problem. I think breaking it up, like what Image did in the 90s, it's gonna help the industry, because people are gonna be able to make living wages making comics again, which isn't possible really in modern corporate comics.
well, that you raise a very interesting point. So let me ask you point blank: are we currently headed? Are we headed for another Image break or Image-like break? Are the way things stand now with particularly with the Jawbreakers campaign, this successful Indiegogo campaign, with Jawbreakers, with Iron Sights, and with the prevalence of sort of like that what has been seen as maybe a Comicsgate related Indigo movement. Do you think this is just a flash in the pan, that it's a blip in the screen? We still got the monopoly with the big two. Do you see a change on the horizon or not? What do you be bold? Be bold. Give me a prediction.
The things I cannot. In that sense, I don't have a reading of what's going on. It's not set in stone. I myself, going through the logistics of the comics I want to make, it's been hard, because it's like I'm trying to predict some. It's like predicting, I don't know how fucking black holes work. Like nobody really knows. Like I'm just guessing from what I know, but from that to being accurate, it's impossible to tell. I was thinking, like, for example, the conversation about digital and the others. For example, with the crowd funds, I think we are missing on the digital market, and it's been you have to have a digital market, because not a lot of people are gonna buy your book for $40 and wait like 6 months to get them. And you can actually reach a broader audience, or you could even translate them and make that's what I'm trying to do with the comic I want to make. I want to make first and foremost a digital comic in 2 languages that everybody can get for cheap, for $2.99 or whatever. An affordable comic that is also redeemable for us who are doing it, that we can keep producing it and people can keep reading them. If they don't want to go out of their way and pay for the $40 special edition, whatever, they can get like the cheap $2.99 and still be in the loop. I think that's missing, and I think people are against digital because they have the collector mind. And I don't think that's bad, but that's not realistic, in the sense that they don't see that digital has its advantages. Even digital coloring, it's at its best in a screen.
Yeah.
And the way you can like with Comixology, how you can go from panel to panel, you can even make the story more surprising that if you watch the whole pages.
Yeah, I would. One of the things that I always thought was a good idea, and I just thought about this the other day when I download certain books that I read on different areas from Amazon. I think would be a great idea for comic books is if you have a comic book, and let's say it's on a particular topic, or even let's say you have a superhero comic and it deals with espionage or crime noir. Why not link that comic book and make it cheap enough? Make a deal with the well-known author who's selling his own novel. And so when you download the novel off Amazon, you get the first 2 chapters of a comic book, of a graphic novel, so that the person not only will get the novel, the e-novel, the e-book, but they'll also get the first 2 or 3 chapters of this comic book, and then for another $2 or $3.99 can order the rest of it. And to me, that's the type of marketing that it needs. But comic book publishers don't do that. Like, you should link your comic books with best-selling actual books, like written books, and have them sold free along with these other books. And
they kind of do that but in a different way. And it's funny because you know how you've been saying about Donny Cates?
Donny Cates, yeah.
Donny Cates, yeah.
Yeah.
Even that is ridiculous compared to how these companies have been working for 30 years. Like, they know their bestseller is not Donny Cates' new Thanos or whatever. Their bestsellers is Frank Miller's Daredevil and Watchmen and X-Men Days of Future Past and, Justice League New Frontier. All those things are what consistently sell worldwide and what they consistently license worldwide. Those are the real money makers. But they are not creating the environment that gave them those books. They completely killed the environment that led to those books.
Yeah, and could you elaborate on that? How did they completely kill the environment with respect to those books? How specifically did they kill
I don't know if you guys are aware of this guy called, for example, Jim Shooter.
Oh, yeah. He's the editor. He was the editor of Marvel Comics in the early 80s, wasn't he?
Yeah, or not even him, or Lin Wine, who created Swamp Thing and Wolverine, or guys like that were the editors in the 80s. And in the 80s, you have this big creative peak in comics because these people who had a lot of experience making comics already were basically leading comics into what became Watchmen and what became Daredevil and what became... This didn't happen because of corporate reasons. It was because even corporate comics by that time were smaller studios with editors-in-chief who know what they were doing and what they wanted from comics. And they led to excellent stories, let alone comic book stories. I mean, these stories are now respected outside of comics because of it, because they were striving to make the best stories possible. This is not happening today anywhere. It's more corporate. It's more, dilute the line and increase a buck here so we can present the sales to the upper management and make it look like we didn't lose money and we can afford, actual talent instead of some random new guy or whatever. We are paying like $50 per page.
I'm gonna switch it now. I'm just gonna switch tactics a little bit here and ask you. When was have you seen Avengers Infinity War?
Yeah, the movie. Yeah, of course. I watched it like 3 times before I reviewed it.
And I'm going to be very selfish here because I know you've probably talked about this on live stream, but I want to know, what did you think of it?
I really liked that movie. I think the Russo brothers have a particular talent to both deliver creatively and manage with the production needs of such a big blockbuster, probably the biggest blockbuster in history today.
Let me ask you this, because and I've brought this up in different live streams in the past, but I'm very interested in your perspective on this. Dan Didio, in an interview I believe it was at San Diego Comic-Con, although I might be corrected on that. I watched his interview, and he made a very bold statement. And he stated that he felt that Marvel's Infinity War movie, actually, he was disappointed watching it, and he gave an underhanded compliment. He said that it did comic books better than the comic books do comic books. And that was his way of saying that, what comic book publishing companies are missing, what DC is missing, what Marvel is missing, is that, and what Feige did and pulled off is...
I wouldn't credit Feige, but
okay,
I would credit the directors, the Russo brothers.
Fair enough, but I mean, in terms of the overall narrative, because if you were to write the Marvel Cinematic Universe in comic book form, it would be in 25 comic books. It would probably take 30. It might take 50 or 60 comic book issues, and you would have a massive comic book epic. And it managed to do something that comic books have failed to do, at least in Dan Didio's mind. This is why I found his comments, they were very revealing. I thought he was very, very, very what he admitted. He basically admitted that DC was not able to pull off what the Marvel Cinematic was able to pull off. They weren't able to pull that off in comic book form. They're trying to do that with Metal, with Justice League, with the 103 issues of Batman, with 50 issues with Scott Snyder on Justice League. They want to create a Marvel Cinematic feel in terms of an overall epic, awesome narrative. But he feels that comic book companies have failed to do that. And I was wondering if you'd agree with that.
Yeah, I would agree, because what the Russo brothers did was story first. And they, even when they had this big story, their priority wasn't talking to the toy guys to see what they needed. Their priority was to find a way to edit all these characters in a way that it made sense. And the agility that the movie has, in spite of being a very large cast and like over 2 hours and 30 minutes, is how they edited. It's close to what Game of Thrones does, because they manage with the same kind of problems with this big narrative with all these characters and just 45 minutes to tell the story. I think that's the thing. They are prioritizing the story above everything else.
Well, I know that with
yeah, you said it yourself your last live stream, how the problem Scott Snyder had, because it was like the Thundercats. He had to see what the guys at merchandise were saying about the comic and what they needed, instead of making his story the way he knew it was gonna work.
And that's how come I always take. It's one of the reasons why I always I'm very, very reluctant to jump onto Twitter streams, and I hate like even remotely jumping on, going against any creative type again in DC or Marvel, because I just don't know what pressures they're under, and so it was very enlightening to me, and maybe I'm naive, but I had to actually see the interview with Scott Snyder, and I thought he was very forthcoming, and I can't imagine what that would be like. I mean, you're just this guy. I mean, Scott Snyder's just a guy's guy, and you got to account to all these higher ups, and you got to. Can you imagine trying to explain Metal to a bunch of people who just want to make toys? I mean, Metal is a complicated story. Even I don't pretend to understand all the nuances of it. And you're trying to explain this to corporate types to get them to make toys on it or whatever, and then to face an onslaught of criticism from guys like me and you about, well, the story breaks down here or there, it could be better here or there. There's a certain degree of, in a way, and I'm sure you'd agree, there's a certain longing that I have to, when days were simpler back in the early, mid 70s, early 80s, when maybe things weren't so complicated. But I don't know.
That's the thing. These are corporate interests now, and they have been for a long time, in the sense that, people romanticize about the Marvel Age and stuff like that, and the bullpen days, and just this little small office with all these wacky creators screaming at each other about how to make stories and stuff. Those days are pretty much gone. If you're looking for that at Marvel or DC, it's not gonna happen unless something very, very radical happens, which I don't think it's likely. Because
what do you think? Jimmy Palmiotti made a comment. This was about 6 months on Twitter. I can't remember exactly, but he's talking about, he was just shooting the shit on Twitter, and he was just throwing out different ideas about different ways to put a comic book ideas out there in terms of a forum or a medium for comic books. And I think we can all agree, or maybe we can all agree that comic books are always going to exist, but they may not always exist, in the sloppy form. They may not always look like this. They might look like trade paperbacks. And anyways, Jimmy Palmiotti was suggesting coming out every 6 months with a hardcover.
Yeah, that's exactly the European model.
Okay, well, you know what, Spike, I apologize to you because you never specifically said when I asked you about the European model. I wasn't entirely sure what that looked
No,
like.
sorry. Yeah, I think I dropped the ball there. The format in Europe usually is you make your story. You take a time to make your story, and just, for example, Black Sad. Black Sad takes a long time, but if you've seen Black Sad, it's a fucking gorgeous masterpiece. But it takes time to make a masterpiece. So what they do is they put this oversized what is called the album format. It contains like around 60 pages of story, but the idea is to put the effort into the quality of the art containing the pages, not so much the page count, which we are in North America, and I've said this I think a couple of times before. We are used to thinking about comics as disposable entertainment in floppy form, and that doesn't fly in this day and age. Like, it's
Well,
impossible to have this printed medium itself, let alone comics. All printed medium is struggling right now.
you know, I so completely agree with you. One of the things that I noticed is, comic books are awesome. They're amazing. And you know what? If I was in a more sophisticated crowd, I could use different adjectives. I could say that they're, culturally revealing. They're, they're religiously enlightening. They're politically informative. They're politically volatile. I could come up with all these phrases. They're philosophically, avant-garde. I could come up with all these wonderful phrases. But the bottom line is, it's the presentation. Presentation matters. And we're reaching a day and age now where, people, as much as digital is important, people aren't going to want to buy the floppies anymore, because you know what? I'm pushing 50, and if I'm trying to explain a message, to somebody that I'm not going to tell them I got it out of a Supergirl comic, because that would be embarrassing, right? Because it's a Supergirl comic. What are you? You're pushing 50 and you're reading Supergirl, or you're reading Hawkman? You're going to tell me how to live my life? My point being is presentation matters, and the European model. If what you're saying is right, when I go to Kohl's bookstore, or in the U.S., might be Chapters, or whatever the bookstore is in Mexico. There, I would assume that presentation, it does matter. And when I have a bookshelf, I've got an impressive looking bookshelf on my main floor in my living room, and it's all the hardcover stuff. I got a Miles Manera collection, all hardcover. It's absolutely beautiful, gorgeous. I've had people stay at my place, and then they're bored, and they'll pick something off the shelf. They'll start reading it. And they don't realize they're reading comics, because it's nice leather bound. Well, and they don't realize that what they're reading is a bloody comic book. Would they have read it if it was in a floppy form? Not a chance. Presentation matters, and we're reaching a day and age where presentation matters. And I really believe that, I really like to hear it when Jimmy Palmiotti did that, and he was describing the European model, which I didn't appreciate, which you have enlightened me on. That, I think, is the future of comic books. That's where we're headed, and I think that's what might ultimately end up saving it.
And it's not even new. We've seen this before. Like, for example, the music market, you have either the people who don't buy music, they just download it, the people who sell it digitally, and the real hardcore music fans. What are they doing? They are collecting cassettes and vinyl and CDs again, because the fetish is going to stay with. The hardcore fans are always going to be hardcore fans, and I think the European. If you've been to La Rue Dante in France, there's like this popular comic book store chain called Pulps. The whole fucking street is filled with comic book stores, but they do different things. That's and it's very very interesting, because There's a pulp store which only sells art. It doesn't even sell comic books. It sells art books, sketchbooks, original art, posters, and stuff like that. They have their American comic book, like our local comic book stores.
Yeah.
Then there's the store that exclusively sells European comic books, and what in America and even in Mexico, not being an Anglo-Saxon part of the North American system, is that we've been used to seeing comics as that disposable thing. And I think that has to change, because it's not even true about comic book fans who buy the floppies. I mean, I don't know anyone who only buys floppies and doesn't buy hardcovers or trade paperbacks, or it's easier to find people who don't buy floppies who do buy the trade paperbacks and the hardcovers.
Yeah. I want to address that there's a little bit of a debate that's going on the live stream. Spike, I just want to read it. Some Okie dude, that's his name, Some Okie dude, has said that he says, "I'm quite polarized on Comicsgate. I despise such figures as DNC and Captain Cummings just for their mean-spiritedness." And also, CC said that Garth Ennis was an SJW. And he says, which is absolutely insane. I mean, did you ever read Preacher or The Boys or goddamn Punisher Max? And then Dark Knight Nation says, feminism has nothing to do with him and his career timeline. Also, for you to demonize all feminist fights against your cause to separate yourself from Comicsgate extremists.
How is it extremist? I've always despised feminists even before AJW was a thing.
I don't know, but what I find interesting about this is, and this is one of the things that I've been torn about this, because I have supported Captain Cummings.
Yeah.
On Patreon, and I disagree with Captain Cummings on many issues, but I'm a huge proponent of the First Amendment, and I read stuff that I disagree with all the time, and I'm not gonna lie to you, that's a very hard thing to do. It's hard.
Yeah, of course.
It's hard to do but I guess it's because what I do for a living. I am a lawyer for a living, and I read stuff that I disagree with all the time. It's part of the job, because I gotta argue against it. But guess what? Every now and then I'm enlightened, and every now and then the other side convinces me I'm wrong. And there's nothing wrong with admitting that the other side might have a point. This happens from time to time. And look, and it's. I just, this goes to what we're talking about earlier, Spike, and this is, I think, the live stream, as people are commenting, is sort of illustrating this. There's this uncomfortableness that everyone has talking about this.
I think I have to disagree there, because I hate feminism. Of course I do, but I have feminist friends who have, and they are still my friends. They perfectly know my position. I've never been silent about my position. The thing is, we are people first. We're not walking ideologies, and that's the problem with Marxist collectivism, because it's all about ideologies. I mean, I can have a conversation with everyone. I can disagree with everyone. The problem is when people, you don't believe in my religion, well, then you must be this. That's where the problems start. I mean, you can be an SJW all you want. I mean, I'm friends with Tim Seeley. He's openly against Comicsgate.
Right.
Mike Norton, openly against Trump and Comicsgate. I see the guy at the convention, he hugs me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess, and the funny thing is where the one argument I would make, and I'm sure you would agree with me on this, is, isn't it funny how I can disagree with somebody who might be, whatever they are, we might disagree fundamentally on Comicsgate versus SJW, whatever topic you want to pick, but yet we can totally agree that Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns redefined the medium and was an instant classic. And we can instantly agree that Watchmen changed the medium. We can instantly agree on all kinds of things. And what's fascinating about that is that we can also agree that in many ways, none of those things, none of those comic books were overtly propaganda or political, and yet, when you really think about it, well, they were kind of political, and
they were. There's a difference. They were political. They were political literature. They invited you to be part of the story.
That's right. And so I guess my question to you, Spike, because I mean, you've been a script editor. You've read a lot of scripts. You've read a lot of writers. I guess I'm a layperson. I'm not a writer. I don't have that experience, and maybe this is a difficult question I'm going to ask you. At least I think it's a difficult question. Is how in the hell do you? What advice would you give to a writer? How do you draw the distinction between preaching in your writing versus, like, how do you know when you've crossed the line from propaganda?
Oh, it's actually it's actually simple, because you at the Writers Guild, you actually are trained to distinguish between what is literature and what is propaganda. Because literature means you have an intention to make a story which is fictional, which is supposed to create an aesthetic experience. Propaganda is meant to dictate to you how to think, or to polarize you, because there is no neutral propaganda. It has to be de facto polarizing. It has to tell you how to think. So when you write a story, like the gold example, V for Vendetta, we already went through this. V for Vendetta, even B says he's not the hero. They put him as a mirror in the panels to what the supercomputer and the prime minister, chancellor, whatever he is doing, and they are put like there's this character has these positions, and this character has these deep positions. At the end, they both lose, because I think what people are forgetting is that who come together was the kid who was with the detective and Evie, and I think the allegory there was, it doesn't matter if you're an extremely radical anarchist or an extreme fascist. None of those are the answer. You have to find a new answer that will come from both sides. I think that's the dialectic that before Vendetta had. He didn't have an answer. He just told you the answer must come from both of these, because in some way both of them are the same thing.
Well, I think you've helped me sort of come to terms with it a little bit, because when I think about V for Vendetta, what comes across the most about that is I did get both sides to the argument, and sometimes, often, particularly in 2017 and 18, sometimes you only get one side, and it's like the writer is forcing you toward a particular point of view, because they're always putting down one point of view and sort of propping up another one. And when you think about V for Vendetta, one of the strengths of that story is that you could see the villainy in the so-called protagonist. You could see the villainy. You could see his cruelty. You could see that he was not a perfect person. You could flaws. You could see the fly in the ointment of his argument, and I think that's what made it so compelling.
No, exactly. And here's pointing out Dark Nation saying that Watchmen wasn't political literally is insane. It's a reflection on power society. Not really, but I'm not saying it's. I'm saying it is political literature. I'm saying it's not propaganda.
Yeah,
I have no. The thing is that it's construed that all the Comicsgate guys don't like, politics. I am a political philosophy lecturer at the National University. I actually know what I'm talking about. Political literature is not propaganda. They are not the same thing.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to,
for example, there's even modern good examples of how to do political literature in comics. You have Batman, the White Knight, or Nightwing, the New Order. I mean, I didn't like the ending of White Knight, but because I felt it was rushed. But the story itself, it never leans somewhere or another. It puts you in the middle of a very complex social situation,
Yeah.
and not even going as far as to making an analogy that Batman is, this guy, and the Joker is that guy. No, it just represents how complex society really is, and it doesn't really have to even prescribe a political leaning to any of the characters. They just put them in the arena and they fight it out. Or Nightwing, the New Order, it goes all around. The main protagonist actually goes to both specters of the story.
No, and you basically hit on exactly what the difference is between a mediocre writer and a great writer. And the great writer can see past their own biases, and that's a gift. And not every writer has that. And okay, I'm not a writer, but I just know that there's a lot of stories. When I'm finished reading a comic book story, if I feel resentful toward the story, it's because I feel like I've been forced to accept something that I don't agree with. The best stories are the ones where I feel I'm allowed to make up my own mind. And it's sort of like if I give you, if I'm arguing with you and I tell you why you're full of shit, you're going to hate me. But if I give you the information and with no judgment, if I just give you information and you figure out for yourself that your opinion might need to be changed, you're not going to resent me as much. Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're going to decide for yourself that maybe I need to reevaluate this. But if I come out to you and I'm a jerk about it and I throw it at you, well, then of course I'm going to be a jerk. And that's the problem now. And I thought that was the problem with, I don't want to pick on Marvel, but I use that as an obvious example, but because we're talking about it. In 2017, I think Marvel was too defensive. Marvel didn't realize how much I think that they were forcing certain political views on their readership, which they ought to have known was a little bit more conservative than they let on. And I think that aggravated the culture war in comics, and it aggravated the Comicsgate controversy more than it needed to be. And what started off as an editorial screw-up on their part became much more, because rather than just owning up to their mistake that they screwed up editorially, they rode the wave that their readers were bigots and racists, as opposed to just owning up to the fact that they had screwed up. And that's what bothers me the most. But sorry, I digressed on that a bit.
No, I understand. There's for example, here the guys at the chat are talking about Watchmen and how Rorschach was like the favorite right-wing character in the story. But that's the thing. I've heard the argument that Rorschach is conservative and that Rorschach was basically an SJW, and both are incorrect. And it's Rorschach was an objectivist.
Wait a minute. What you say both are incorrect. I thought he was conservative too. So
no,
convince me I'm wrong.
He even, there's a scene where he denounces that God doesn't even exist, and that modern Rorschach is an objectivist, a complete, extreme, ridiculous objectivist. Which is the thing is, people think of terms of right and left, and those don't exist. They haven't existed since the French Revolution. I mean, if you use that paradigm, the Nazis were both extreme right and extreme left, so that makes the spectrum useless.
Right.
The problem is the spectrum, not what it's trying to define. Rorschach was an objectivist. He was a rabid objectivist, and he was, even Alan Moore has said it, he was Steve Ditko. That was Mr. A speaking. It's his version of Mr. A. So
his version of Mr. Who? Sorry?
Of Mr. A, who was like the...
I don't know who that is. I don't know the reference.
Oh, Mr. A was a character by Steve Ditko who was basically like the extreme version of the Question, who was like the exact form of radical objectivism he preached and why he left Marvel. And, and all the people say how is he conservative? Objectivism is nowhere conservative. It's even required for an objectivist to be an atheist, I think.
Yeah, well, I think that the fact that he was an atheist is obviously traditionally conservatism is not associated with atheism, obviously, at least in the American political paradigm. But I think of Rorschach as being an extreme pragmatist.
Yeah, exactly. That's what
better way to describe it, perhaps, than conservatism, because right now it's very easy to get tied up in I would not say that Rorschach was like the religious right in the United States in that respect. I just meant in the sense that this was not the type of guy that would be bothered by. He would treat a villain like if Rorschach came across somebody that had assaulted a woman, he wouldn't care if it was black, white, green, yellow, purple. He would throw that person down an elevator shaft, and he wouldn't blink an eye. Like,
no, I understand.
Yeah, that's what I meant by conservative.
But that's not conservative either, because communists do that all the time.
You know what? I stand corrected. You're right on that. You're right on that. And I guess this is why I'm glad I'm having this discussion with you, because I think this is one of the problems that happens when we make these assumptions about what I made an assumption about what conservatism was, and I didn't understand how you saw it, and yet you were using the same word.
Maybe if we go through what conservatism is, and conservatism is the advocacy of traditional values, which Rorschach has none. And the important thing about Rorschach is not that he was an objectivist, is that he was based on the archetype of the character who is the most hardcore principle you can be, and the one that would die for that principle. And it's like they live a death wish, like Batman or whatever.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of that. I'm reminded of that final scene in Watchmen before Rorschach is killed by Dr. Manhattan. You know, Dr. Manhattan doesn't want to kill Rorschach, but Rorschach just looks at him and says, "Do it, because." Rorschach's telling him, "I'm not going to change," because Dr. Manhattan is so used to having the power to change time and change.
Yeah, he cannot change human nature.
And Rorschach is telling him, "Don't change me. I'm not going to change. If you don't like what I stand for, kill me, because I'm not going to change." And there's a message there. It's like Rorschach was saying, "Look, don't change who I am. If you don't like me, if you don't appreciate me, kill me. Eliminate me. I want to die for something. This is what I'm prepared to die for. Kill me. Let me die for something." And it's a very powerful moment in Watchmen.
No, I understand, and I think that's the important thing about these kinds of literature. It put a rock in a hard place and put you in the middle of it, because Rorschach and the comedian is what drives the story. It's what we call the detonator event.
The what event?
The detonation of the conflict or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And Rorschach is the guy who you see the story come through, even though you have very well fleshed out characters. And how they made it confront, even though, and it's important to understand that nobody won in Watchmen, and even if you think Ozymandias won. What he asks Dr. Manhattan, like, "Did you see what I did? Was I correct?" And Dr. Manhattan, in his God position, he just say, "Adrian, things are not that simple. Nothing ever ends."
Yeah.
And you have the Rorschach sending the note, his diary, and it's like it goes to this idea that ideas are bulletproof. How do you kill an idea? And that's what Rorschach, you can kill the human that has the idea, but you cannot subvert the human into changing his principles, and his idea will still live on even if he's not even there.
Yeah. Well, there's that whole carrying on with your analogy there. There's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. To quote, I don't know who I'm quoting, but that's not my quote, but it's true that. And Rorschach's diary, appropriately, Rorschach's ideas and what he stood for, appropriately form the basis of Doomsday Clock. Regardless of your feelings on Doomsday Clock, and I know, Spike, I spoke to you before. I know that you don't. I don't think you have as high opinion of Doomsday Clock as I do, but I really think that I love the whole idea. The beauty of what Jeff Johns is doing with Doomsday Clock is he's taking that real world view of the Watchmen universe, and he's trying to reconcile it with this sort of like almost like this mythological, godlike view of the DC universe, where everything's a little bit more, where heroes can save us from our darkest, screw ups, and he's trying to reconcile them, and I find it very, very interesting, and I still maintain that Doomsday Clock is going to be Jeff Johns' magnum opus. So far, I think the symbolism and the philosophy there, and I want to have a debate with you at the end of Doomsday Clock, and I want to review with you specifically all of Doomsday Clock, because I think that's going to have a lot to say, and I want to juxtapose the Watchmen miniseries with the Doomsday Clock miniseries, and I can't think of a better guy to deal with that than you.
Oh yeah, we can do that, and I think regardless of what I think about Doomsday Clock, and I've said this, I think Jeff Johns is a great writer, and I'm happy that he's back to just doing comics, because I don't think he was very happy, overworked, and just not being able to make comics, which is obviously what the guy is always wanted to do. And I think they burned him out a lot, even as far back as the brightest days. I mean, I think he was the big name at DC, and they just used him, and it takes its toll when you are a creative writer. It's you need to rest the brain sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with you. I actually think you mentioned Brightest Day. I think Brightest Day was actually the darkest day for Jeff Johns.
Yeah.
Of all the things that Jeff Johns has written, Brightest Day, I mean, I don't want to even talk about Brightest Day.
No, it's not that the guy is bad, but we all have bad days.
Yeah, it was not his best work, to say the least, in my humble opinion. But, but having said that, I never asked you, I want to ask you this, Spike, because I'm curious. Have you been able to read any DC lately? What's your view of the DC universe lately? What's your view of the DC?
The thing about me as a reader is that I don't go into the universe thing. I think the universe thing has also been kind of a problem. Do you remember in the 90s? I don't know how much Marvel you read, but for example, how basically the mutants lived in their corner of the universe, and the Avengers lived in their corner of the universe, and Daredevil, it was like New York was another fucking planet, because they were separate, and the crossovers were something special. It's not only that keeping them separate made the crossover special, but their paradigms will always become paradoxical when you mix up characters.
Right.
For example, we had this controversy. I think it was dumb, but the controversy about Batman being an atheist.
Right.
I think that would even be a question you don't need answered. But I understand where it comes from, because and I subverted it. For example, how is it that Daredevil is Catholic when he knows Thor?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, you. Actually, Spike, that's a beautiful point. It's a poetic point, even, because it underscores the almost seeming, there's almost a hypocrisy and an insanity to the whole, all of the universe, because, but I mean, man, let me focus quickly on the Daredevil aspect. One of the things that Matt Murdock's always had is his fascination. Well, obviously he's a Catholic, and every writer that writes Daredevil is usually always a scene at some point in their storyline where he's confessing to a Catholic priest, or he's talking to a Catholic priest, or he gains some insight after talking to a Catholic priest. And by the way, I was raised Roman Catholic, so I got nothing against Roman Catholicism. Okay?
Yeah, I'm Mexican.
Yeah, well, no, fair enough. I'm just saying. But I'm just saying that there's always this part of it. I've always been forgiving of that seeming disconnect in comic books, only because one of the things that is rarely truly dealt with in Marvel or DC is the fact that atheism, well, in my mind, atheism can't really exist in the Marvel or DC universe because gods exist.
Yeah.
Because the debate's settled. The debate doesn't exist because the citizens of the Marvel universe or DC universe know that gods exist because they came down. Like the last big crisis we had, it wasn't a tornado. It wasn't Hurricane Katrina or whatever. It was, in fact, a god came down and destroyed half our planet. So we know gods exist. Thank you very much. So atheism isn't an issue. So the whole thing seems rather odd to me that, I agree with you that, Matthew Murdock going to his Catholic priest, like, where's the Catholic God in the Marvel universe? Because it sure as hell isn't making a presence. And if it is, how would it fare against Galactus? I mean, those are things that Marvel
I understand, and I actually don't prescribe. Yeah, I'm an atheist, but Daredevil is one of my favorite characters of all time. I would never make him an atheist. It's just the paradigm is what, when you have, and it's what I was thinking in Avengers versus X-Men back when Matt Murdock was an Avenger. Like, how are you Catholic now when you are teammates with a fucking god? I think Hercules was in the team as well. And it's the same for, how could Reed Richards be an atheist when he knows, like, the Living Tribunal and all this stuff? Yeah, I think what editors need to keep in mind, if these shock moments may cause controversy 1 second, but they have the potential to ruin stories and make them nonsensical. I think they should think more how to nurture the character. If Daredevil is Catholic, play into it and stuff like that. And I think there's no better character to play into exploring that.
Well, I think
not the existence of God, but how does a Catholic superhero lives.
Well, I actually I personally like when they introduce, to me, religious themes in comic books, especially superhero comic books. I find them very interesting, and I actually enjoy reading them. Some of the best comic book stories I've ever read have had a religious element to them. The best Superman comic book I read in the last 3-4 years was a one-shot issue where Superman basically goes, he takes Jonathan, he takes his son Jonathan, and they encounter a planet that is about to be destroyed, and they want to be destroyed. They don't want to be saved because it's against their religion. They want to die because their God says they're going to die, and they don't want Superman to save their planet. And the conversation between Superman, and ultimately the planet is destroyed. And ultimately Superman becomes powerless, and Superman doesn't ultimately really know why he becomes powerless. He just does. And it's a suggestion that it's because of divinity that, this planet is dying, and there's an implication there that it's by design. And I there's a beauty to that.
Yeah, of course. Especially Superman being himself a savior god.
I know. And there's, and I was on a live stream with Dark Knight Nation. He's a great guy, and I recommend people go to his channel, Dark Knight Nation. He's a great guy. He's very insightful. He's passionate about Batman and all things DC and Marvel. But, I mentioned to him on our live stream, one of the best comics I ever read, I thought was just beautiful, was Superman. It was DC Comics Presents Superman, and it was actually Superman and the Spectre. And Superman was, in the previous issue, it was Superman and Supergirl. Supergirl had defeated Mongol by destroying Warworld, and she shot like a missile through the basically the Death Star of Warworld. She destroyed it, and she ended up flying so fast. She was knocked unconscious, but her momentum carried her through, and she broke through the barriers of our universe. And Superman was chasing her, and he couldn't reach her. And finally, the Spectre stopped Superman because the final barrier that he was going to break was going to be the barrier, essentially, it implied, to heaven.
Yeah.
And it was Spectre saying, look, Superman, you can't do this. And Superman kept fighting and fighting. And finally, at the end, Superman realized what he was doing. And Superman finally said, I just want Supergirl. And Spectre looked at him and said, Superman, you need only have asked. And magically Supergirl appeared, and he gave Superman Supergirl. And it was a beautiful comic book. It was beautiful. It was majestic. It suggested that there was something out there better beyond us that we didn't understand. And we didn't need to understand what was beyond, because we all knew. It was beautiful.
It plays into Death of not Death of Superman, but The Return of Superman. If you remember that comic book that came with the white bag and the S, and where the cover is basically kind of like Kal-El descending from heaven.
Yeah, that's right.
That's how it was treated. That same very way.
Yeah, no, it was. I mean, and the thing is that's the great thing about comic books, and I think that to draw this back to your earlier point, Spike, when you talk about there's a difference between propaganda versus, you can deal with political issues in a way that isn't propaganda. You can also deal with issues of life and death that aren't religious, that just make people reflect on our mortality without making a judgment about religion. And that's the beauty of comic books, is that when it's done right, you can make people reflect on their mortality and what comes after without making a judgment about who they are and what they believe in. And that's the beauty of comic books when comic books are done right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's kind of like the Twilight Zone. And the thing about the Twilight Zone is that it looks political because people have hardcore actions usually in those episodes. But the thing is, they never are definite ideologies. You can even say, if you've heard Rod Serling speak and stuff, he was a liberal conservative himself. He was a veteran. He started writing stories, and he started breaking into TV because he wanted to tell stories to deal with his time spent. I don't remember if he was in Second World War or in the other wars with Korea and stuff. Yeah. But yeah, the thing about the Twilight Zone, and I think that's what happened in comics, is that their message is not really political in the sense that it doesn't come from one side or the other. It's just actions. Like fascism is not an ideology; it's an action of being aggressive to impose. That can be any political leniency you want can be fascist. So I think that's where the confusion comes, because someone prescribed their own politics into that, and made it very made a dictatorship out of their story. That's what we are defined by our actions, not by what we proclaim. You for example, this is something I like, because I know you, for example, and all you guys. If you ask me to make a dissection, you are all liberal conservatives, because you believe in your traditional family values and religion and stuff. But it's liberal because you accept other people's rights and you accept other people's liberties, and that's the core principle of liberalism. It doesn't politics is not a spectrum. It's like a deck of cards. You can play a 10, and that 10 could be part of a pair or a royal flush. The thing is, you have a 10. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say.
No, and you said a lot very well. We've covered a lot of topics here. I'm going to end this live stream now, because I wanted to keep it where it's we're coming on now. We're a little over 2 hours, and I just want to say, Spike, I don't want to make this into too much of a love fest, but I have to say that I've always admired your forthrightness. I've admired your frankly, you've you've got a certain shoot spot. You know, the Jews, you know, in Judaism they call it shoot spot.
Yeah.
I'm not a Jew, but you got a shoot spot, you know, and that's and I see that on Twitter, and I see you're not afraid to engage, and you're definitely not what I mean. I don't want to use the word snowflake, but I'm going to use it anyway. But I mean, you are you always back up what you say, and anyways, I've always admired that, and you've sort of encouraged me to sort of come out of my comfort zone sometimes, because I don't always for someone in my professional life, I push the envelope all the time, but online I'm always reluctant to. But there are certain things that cry out for response to, and you know, I got to say, I encourage everybody who's watching this and who will watch this to check out Spike's channel, Spike Valentine. You know, Spike doesn't have necessarily all the best video equipment for for what he has to say, but trust me when I tell you that what he says, it makes a lot of sense, and he knows what he's doing, and the fact is, the facts will bear it out. And you know,
yeah, I'm not precisely right all the time, but I have an argument. If you, it's all about having an argument and just waiting it out with other arguments. I think that's all we have, really.
Oh no, for sure. And I just you know, I we're in the midst. The fact is that I didn't have to do this sort of live stream. I didn't have to talk about this. But the thing is, I feel it's important to talk about, and too often I see too many brilliant creative people like yourself, Spike, being I think too many are being villainized completely inappropriately, and it's completely wrong, and it's just plain we're all out. We all want great comic books, and the fact of the matter is that, you know, this is about creating narratives. This is about creating stories for people to be entertained, and you're at the forefront of that. And this, you know, too much of this Comicsgate versus SJW controversy. I think people are prejudging people's works before they've actually read them. And there's nothing that bugs me more, and I know you agree with me on this, is that, you know, read something before you criticize it.
Yeah.
You know, read it. Actually read it. It's frustrating.
For example, like Jeff Lemire, I don't agree with anything he has to say, but The Terrifics is my current favorite superhero comic book.
And you know what? And that's a credit. And that basically, if that doesn't tell me everything I need to know really about yourself in a way, then and everyone else, that, you know, the fact that we can disagree fundamentally on different issues and still fundamentally love certain comic books, that's got to tell us something. So no matter how far apart we are, you know, and I'm not, to be quite honest, I don't think we disagree fundamentally a lot. I'm just using it as an example. But yeah, I think that's the problem with right now. In a day and age right now where comic books are, by some people's argument, dying, the fact that we have divisions within a very small comic collecting community where we're attacking each other, I think is appalling. And I think it's tragic. It's really tragic. And that this is why I wanted to have this. And I know it's my first, it's the comic Boomerang thing. And I appreciate Spike that you're on it.
Thanks for having me, dude. I hope.
My God.
I'm gonna be watching every single Sunday I have off or whatever.
Well, let me tell you something. The reason why I wanted to do, I called it comic Boomerang, and honestly, I'm not gonna lie. The fact that Boomerang had to do with boom, comic boom, that had a large, and the fact that comic Boomerang, the idea that right now everything every one of us says comes back to haunt us.
Yeah.
And right now, no, but it's true though. Everything that comic creators are afraid they're afraid of being truthful on Twitter. They're afraid of expressing their true selves because they're afraid of what comes back will haunt them. Well, guess what? You know what? Enough of this. Variety is what makes us great. Variety is what makes stories excel. It's variety in the narrative that makes comic books spectacular. It's what put them on the map. It's what's led to the greatest box office smashes in movie making history. Comic books. Enough of this nonsense that a bunch of, if you got a successful comic book, you're going to attack the writer by saying he's racist and bigoted? Give me a break. Whatever happened to, why don't we just respect the narrative? Respect the story. How does it speak to you? And if you're angry at the story, that means it's a good story because it provoked something in you. It spoke to you in some way. Enough of this nonsense where we attack the writer or we attack the artist because we don't like the story or it bugs us in some way. And that's why I wanted to have you as my first on Comic Boomerang, because you have not backed down and you're one of the few that have stood up, and you're one of those voices, Spike, that I think needs to be heard more of. And you've taken bullets. You've taken bullets, my friend, that should have been taken by others. And you have my respect.
Well, I appreciate it, man. Thank you for your kind words and for having me. And definitely a fan of your channel. I mean, it's with all, it's not a coincidence that Captain Cummings always said you were like his go-to meme guy. With a Boomerang thing, yeah, I understood. You have like a knack for the publicity, for that type of those how do you call them in English, like wordplays or something?
I'm not sure.
The wordplay with the Boomerang and Comic Boom. And I'm also a big fan of your channel because I think you keep it honest, and I think that's the most important thing. Doing whatever you want to do, keeping it honest, I think it's gonna pay its dividends. I think that's the real Boomerang in the whole situation. The good things you do might not help you now, but they might help you in the future.
Well, the thing is, I just want more and more people to have YouTube channels. I want more people to review comics. I want more people to buy comics. I want them to buy digital. I want them to buy Indiegogo. I want them to buy your new project. I want comic books to expand. I want children. I want my daughter to appreciate how extraordinary comic books are. And I realize that it's difficult in this day and age of video games and everything else, that it's hard to appreciate comic books, and they're more expensive than ever before, and they're more. Look, we can get it. That could be another 10-hour debate on what the fate of comic books. The fact of the matter is that it's an extraordinary medium, and there's extraordinarily intelligent people that are part of this fantastic community. And you know what? At the end of the day, I'm absolutely convinced that if we had SJWs and comic skaters in the same bar on any given night, we would be doing shooters together and we'd be loving the same comics. There's something about the online, there's this vitriol that I think, honestly, we're all in this together. We all love comic books, and that's what we got to focus on.
Yeah, we got to focus on the passion for comics, and that's what I like about your channel. It's all about the comics in the way, like, for example, how you. It's amazing how you go through Wonder Woman. When I've known you, you haven't been that amazed with these stories, but you still have that passion for it, and it's that you support it because you want to see it succeed, and that's what we all want at the end of the day. I want it, and it's not that I want to. I enjoy SJW themed comics like Sunstone and Strangers in Paradise. I don't think we have to get rid of them. I just think we have to, if you want to read these types of books, well, there's this type, and I think we need options. That's basically it. It's all about having options, and that's why what I like about the Comics 8 thing is that at least there's some options that we wouldn't have if we just left it to the luck of the big two. And I mean, I enjoyed X-Men Grand Design. I think it's a great book if you love the history of X-Men, even if you know it, you looking it through the eyes of the watcher. I think it's a very cool idea.
Yeah, no, for sure. And yeah, so well, Spike, I'm gonna end this live stream now. I want to give a shout out to Spike Valentine, guys. Check out his channel. I will post a link, Spike, after this to your channel.
Thanks, man.
And I'm gonna encourage people to listen to Spike's insights on this, because it's a lot. It's gonna be different than the usual tripe you might get from the other side, and you have to listen. You have to listen to an insider, to somebody who understands what's happening in the industry, and it's interesting. And that doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but it's important that you understand the other perspective, and that's what's so important about this. And look, I enjoy comic books, and if I love a comic book, I'm going to love it. It doesn't matter what anybody tells me. And you're going to love a comic book. Whoever you are watching this, you're going to enjoy it, and you're entitled to enjoy it no matter what. But, at the same time, don't be afraid to listen to outside perspectives on this, and especially from somebody like Spike, who's inside the industry. And this is something where I love, because I'm a wannabe. I'm someone who, in a different lifetime, if there was an alternate universe out there, I'd be writing or editing comic books. But I'm not. My life took a different path, and so I get to just be this guy who has a YouTube channel with a smaller amount of subscribers.
You are the most important person in comics, because you read them, you buy them, you support them.
Yeah.
And I think, contrary to what DNC says, I think that's the lifeblood of the industry. That's where it starts.
Well, you know what? I think it does too. And that's why I mentioned earlier about the Jimmy Palmiotti suggestion. And I know Jimmy. I just mentioned Jimmy Palmiotti because he's sort of a creator name. He's certainly not the first person who mentioned it, and you might have been before him, Spike. I don't know, but
and I support Jimmy too. I mean, Jimmy had a hand in saving Marvel at one point with the Marvel Knights, along with Joe Quesada and Ken Smith on Daredevil. So I think he should be heard as well. Even if he doesn't like Comicsgate, it doesn't mean they don't have important insights.
Yeah, no, for sure. I totally agree with that, and I actually think that what I do think that the industry is headed for more of a situation where we're going to be having the comic books with graphic novel forms, and the comic book medium is changing. But honestly, when there's no way that it's going to go the way of the dodo bird. When we have the top 10 movies grossing of all time, how can we possibly have our books not being more successful than they are? Something is wrong there, and I'm not sure who's going to correct it, but it's got to be dealt with.
Yeah, we'll try to do it, even if it's using different approaches. That's what it's all about, trying to fix this, even though we believe different things or different ways to do it.
Yeah. But anyways, guys, I just want to say thank you for everyone who's watching. And I know we're going on 2.5 hours now. I'm going to call it quits. And I just want to say thank you to Spike. I want everyone to check out Spike Valentine's YouTube channel. Spike, is it promote your channel there?
My channel, I think it's youtube.com /Spike Valentine 13, and I'm on Twitter as Wordsmith Spike, everything together. I actually, if you want to hit me up and tell me your opinion, I pretty much appreciate it. I don't even want you to share my stuff. I just want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah,
that's my thing about YouTube. I'm in it for the comments, and I even think social media would be better if we didn't have likes and we only had comments, so people could speak their mind.
Well, that's there you go, guys. Everyone, thank you for watching. Spike, thank you so much for being my first guest on Comic Boomerang. And again, the logic on Comic Boomerang is everything we say on this channel can and will and very likely be used against us at some future point, because that is the culture war that flies between us. But guess what? If the freedom to express yourself means anything, it means if you can't express yourself, and if you express yourself, if you don't honestly at some point want to be held accountable for what you said, then you shouldn't have said it in the first place. And I had Spike on for a very good reason, is that he stands by what he says. And I also know him to be the type of guy that when he's wrong, he says he's wrong. And I do that too. And I've done that, and I've proven that. And it doesn't matter if you believe us or not. You can hold us accountable, because that's what the First Amendment is about. And in Canada, we have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And you know what?
In Mexico.
What's that?
Article 6 in Mexico. It's freedom of speech article.
Freedom of speech. This is important stuff. And remember, guys, we all love comic books, and we all love reading them. And chances are we all love the same, very similar stories. So in any ways, guys, I'm going to let everyone sign off now. I'm going to leave the call sign or the signs for links to Spike's channel and my own. And then until next time, Comic Boom, out.